Salem Village, Massachusetts Bay Colony, winter of 1692. The scream did not come from the forest, nor from the frozen fields that surrounded Salem Village like a pale, watchful sea. It came from inside a house. On a bitter January night, when the wind clawed at wooden walls and the sky hung low and colorless, a young girl collapsed onto the floor of the parsonage. Her body twisted violently, her fingers bent at impossible angles, and from her throat poured a sound that no one in the room could understand, half prayer, half terror. The fire crackled, shadows leaped across the walls, and in that moment the people of Salem believed something ancient and unspeakable had returned to walk among them. They did not yet know her name would be remembered for centuries. They did not yet know that before the year ended, 19 people would hang, 1 would be crushed to death, dozens would rot in prison, and an entire community would be scarred forever. All they knew, or thought they knew, was that the devil had come to Salem. Salem Village in 1692 was not a place of mystery. It was a harsh, practical settlement carved out of unforgiving land by English Puritans who believed God watched every breath they took. Life was rigid, disciplined, and ruled by Scripture. Every joy was suspect, every pleasure needed justification. Sin was not an abstract idea, it was a daily threat, waiting to creep into the soul through idleness, disobedience, or doubt. Winter made everything worse. Snow buried the fields, food ran low, wolves howled at night. The French and Native American wars to the north sent waves of refugees into Massachusetts, bringing with them stories of massacres, burned villages, and unseen enemies. Fear was already part of life in Salem, long before anyone spoke the word witch. And fear, once given a voice, does not easily fall silent. The parsonage belonged to Reverend Samuel Parris, a man as stern as the faith he preached. He had arrived in Salem Village only a few years earlier, and his presence had divided the community. Some supported him fiercely, others resented his demands for higher pay, better firewood, and unquestioned authority. Parris believed deeply in invisible forces. To him, the world was a battlefield between God and Satan, and Salem Village stood dangerously close to the front lines. Living in his home were his daughter, Betty Parris, just 9 years old, his niece, Abigail Williams, 11, and his enslaved servant, Tituba, a woman from the Caribbean whose stories, songs, and customs were foreign to the strict Puritan mind. On that winter evening, it was Betty who first screamed. She claimed unseen hands pinched her skin, twisted her limbs, and whispered in her ear. Soon Abigail joined her, convulsing, screaming, throwing herself into corners as if fleeing an invisible attacker. At first, the adults thought it was illness. Then they thought it was attention. Then they thought it was punishment from God. But as the days passed, the girls did not improve, they worsened. Doctors were called. One of them, unable to find any physical cause, delivered a sentence that would change history. This is the evil hand. In Puritan New England, those words had only one meaning: witchcraft. The idea did not shock Salem. Witch trials had happened before in Europe and even in New England. The Puritans believed the devil actively recruited witches to destroy godly communities. The Bible itself seemed to confirm it: "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." What shocked Salem was how quickly suspicion spread and how hungry people were to believe. Soon other girls began to suffer similar fits, Ann Putnam, Jr., Mercy Lewis, Mary Walcott, and others cried out in church, collapsed during sermons, and accused invisible spirits of tormenting them. They pointed at empty spaces, screamed names, and begged for mercy. And Salem listened, because the alternative, that this terror had no clear cause, was far worse. Pressure mounted to identify the witches responsible. Reverend Parris prayed harder, preached louder, and demanded answers. Parents questioned children, neighbors whispered, old grudges resurfaced. Finally, under intense interrogation, the girls spoke names. The first accused were three women who fit Salem's deepest fears. Tituba, an enslaved woman, dark-skinned, foreign, and powerless. Sarah Good, a homeless beggar, pregnant, bitter, and known for muttering curses when denied charity. Sarah Osborne, an elderly woman who rarely attended church and scandalized the village by marrying her servant. They were not random choices, they were convenient. When warrants were issued and the women were dragged before the magistrates, Salem gathered to watch. This was no longer a private fear, it was public theater. Sarah Good protested her innocence fiercely, even as the afflicted girls screamed and writhed whenever she spoke. Sarah Osborne, ill and confused, barely defended herself. Tituba, however, did something no one expected. She confessed. Under threat of whipping and execution, Tituba told a story that fed Salem's darkest imagination. She spoke of signing the devil's book, of flying through the night, of animal familiars, black dogs, red cats, yellow birds that whispered commands. She claimed there were others, many others, working in secret to destroy the Puritan way of life. Her confession did not calm the village, it ignited it. Because if Tituba was telling the truth, if witches truly walked among them, then Salem was not facing 3 enemies, it was facing dozens, and anyone could be one of them. What followed was not justice, it was contagion. Accusations multiplied rapidly. Children accused parents, servants accused masters, neighbors accused neighbors. Old disputes over land, inheritance, and reputation transformed into deadly testimony. The courts accepted spectral evidence, claims that the spirit or specter of the accused had appeared in dreams or visions to torment the girls. There was no defense against this. If you denied it, you were lying. If you confessed, you were guilty. If you questioned the process, you were suspicious. Silence itself became dangerous. Prisons filled, fear ruled, and through it all, the afflicted girls were treated not as children, but as instruments of divine revelation. No one stopped to ask the most dangerous question of all. What if they were wrong? By spring, Salem Village was no longer recognizable. It had become a place where trust had died, where survival depended not on truth, but on accusation. Even respected church members, wealthy landowners, and pious mothers found themselves named as servants of Satan. Among them was Rebecca Nurse, a 71-year-old grandmother known for her kindness and deep faith. Her arrest shocked the colony. If she could be a witch, then anyone could be. And that realization pushed Salem beyond the point of return. The gallows had not yet been built, the executions had not yet begun, but the machinery of death was already in motion. Fear had learned to speak, and Salem had decided to listen.
Spring, summer, 1692. By the time the snow melted from the roads of Salem Village, something far colder had settled into the hearts of its people. Fear had become law. What began as whispered concern inside a parsonage had grown into a public emergency stretching across the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Jail cells filled faster than they could be built. Iron shackles clanged day and night. Mothers were torn from children. Farmers abandoned their fields. And everywhere, the same question echoed in private prayers and sleepless nights. Who will be accused next? The answer, increasingly, was anyone. In early March of 1692, the first examinations took place in crowded meeting houses. Magistrates Jonathan Corwin and John Hathorne, men of education and authority, sat in judgment while the accused stood helpless before them. The afflicted girls were brought into the room. That decision changed everything. Whenever an accused person entered, the girls screamed, they collapsed, they clutched their throats as if being strangled by invisible hands. They claimed specters leaped from the bodies of the accused and attacked them in full view of the court. And the magistrates believed them. No physical evidence was required, no proof beyond the girls' agony. The suffering itself was treated as testimony, and the courtroom became a stage where terror performed daily. If the girls cried out, the accused was guilty. If the girls fell silent, it was only because the witch had momentarily withdrawn. There was no winning. Among the first respected citizens arrested was Rebecca Nurse. Her white hair, gentle voice, and lifelong devotion to the church made her an unlikely servant of Satan. When she was brought before the court, many in Salem murmured their disbelief. Even some of the afflicted girls hesitated. But fear is stronger than reason. As Rebecca answered questions calmly, the girls began to writhe again. They claimed her specter stabbed them with invisible needles. They screamed that she commanded them to sign the devil's book. Rebecca denied everything. Her denials meant nothing. She was sent to prison. With her arrest, the final illusion shattered. Virtue offered no protection. As weeks passed, the accusations spread outward like a disease. Salem Village was no longer the center. Nearby towns, Andover, Ipswich, Beverly, felt the infection take hold. One accusation created another. One confession led to 10 new names. And confession became the only known path to survival. Those who confessed to witchcraft were spared execution, at least for the moment. They were told to name others. The more names they provided, the more cooperative they appeared. Those who maintained their innocence faced the gallows. The message was clear: lie and live, or tell the truth and die. In May of 1692, the colony established a new legal body, the Court of Oyer and Terminer, literally to hear and determine. Its purpose was efficiency. Its effect was devastation. Presided over Chief Justice William Stoughton, the court embraced spectral evidence fully. Stoughton believed the devil could not assume the shape of an innocent person without permission. Therefore, if a specter appeared bearing someone's face, that person must be guilty. It was a logic sealed against doubt. Governor William Phipps, newly returned from military campaigns, approved the court under pressure to restore order. He did not yet understand what kind of order was being created. The first execution took place on June 10, 1692. Bridget Bishop, a tavern owner known for wearing colorful clothes and speaking her mind, was convicted of witchcraft. She had been accused of bewitching men, ruining beer, and appearing as a specter at night. She denied every charge. It did not matter. She was taken to Gallows Hill and hanged. The crowd watched in silence as her body fell. Some prayed, others wept. Many felt relief. If a witch had been executed, then perhaps the nightmare would end. It did not. It had only begun. After Bridget Bishop's death, executions became routine. On June 30th, Rebecca Nurse was convicted, despite a jury initially finding her not guilty. When the afflicted girls erupted in screams, the verdict was reversed. On July 19th, she was hanged alongside 4 others. As she climbed the ladder, witnesses later recalled her reciting the Lord's Prayer clearly and without hesitation. Witches were believed incapable of doing so. Even that did not save her. The rope tightened, the platform fell, and something in Salem died with her. Inside the prisons, conditions were unbearable. Accused witches were chained to walls, they slept on dirt floors, food was scarce, disease spread quickly. Some died before ever reaching trial. Families were forced to pay for their imprisonment. If they could not afford it, they starved. Children were not spared. Dorothy Good, only 4 years old, was accused of witchcraft after repeating words she heard adults say. She was chained in a cell for months. When she was finally released, she could barely speak. No one would ever call Salem a godly place again. The afflicted girls grew more powerful with each passing week. They sat beside judges, they interrupted proceedings, they named new suspects mid-trial. Their visions dictated arrests. Some historians later argued they were victims of mass hysteria. Others suggested manipulation, trauma, or even poisoning. But in 1692, no one questioned them openly. To question them was to risk accusation. And so the court continued. By August, executions came in groups. 5 more were hanged on August 19th, including George Burroughs, a former minister. At the gallows, he stunned the crowd by perfectly reciting the Lord's Prayer. The crowd hesitated. For a moment, doubt flickered. Then a minister declared that the devil could mimic holy words. The executions proceeded. Salem had crossed into a place where evidence no longer mattered. Faith had become weaponized. Law had become fear given structure. But even in the midst of hysteria, cracks began to appear. Prominent voices whispered concern. Spectral evidence troubled some ministers. The jails overflowed. Accusations reached dangerously close to the governor's own family. The question that Salem had avoided for months could no longer be ignored. What if the devil was not the one on trial?